No. Holy sh... Holy sh... Holy sh... Oh! Oh my God! Yo guys, what is up? Max on our first Descendant video, and today we actually have my first ever Esiemo build. I have been neglecting playing Esiemo for a very long time, and I'm a little upset that I did, because there's some actually pretty crazy things that you can do with him. With the most recent patch, they added mods that allow you to increase your damage on Descendants that don't easily build into crit. Esiemo has a 5% crit chance, and Esiemo kind of always had pretty good burst damage, but these new mods take his burst damage to the next level. Today we're going to be breaking down everything you need to know about mobbing and bossing on Esiemo, and he can do some pretty crazy things. So I hope you guys enjoy the video. Let's get right into it. So before we get into the modules and the build and breakdown, I kind of want to explain some pretty core concepts of how to deal the most damage at Esiemo. Because, you know, I've never made a guide on him before, so these things weren't immediately obvious to me, so I want to make sure that they are easy to understand for y'all. So, to start, Esiemo is all about burst damage, and his burst damage primarily comes from the amount of bombs that he has on a target. Now, when we're, running around, the majority of his damage is going to be coming from his third ability. These guided landmines have a 1,000 damage multiplier. We can have a maximum of 3 stacks, which means that we can place 3 of them down. That's not totally true. We'll talk about that in a second. And they will kind of auto grab on to enemies that walk into the vicinity. And with our second ability, we can detonate them. The second ability detonates the first and the third. And we are going to get a 35% damage increase per bomb with our setup right now. That is a 350% damage increase if we're detonating more than 10 bombs. And so the real core thing about Esiemo is we want to stack as many bombs as we possibly can. Obviously, we only get a damage increase up to 10, but we can have 16, 17, 20 bombs on a boss before detonating them. And one of the tricks to doing that is actually having to wait till after the boss spawns. So right now, I'm going to place my explosives down, my third ability, and you can see via my second ability, which will say how many bombs are available for me to detonate, you can see I've got 2, I've got 3, now I've got 4. If I place another one down, one of them explodes and I still only have 4. One of them explodes, I still only have 4. So this is not letting me stack more on my third ability because there isn't an enemy to target. Now we're going to do something interesting. I'm going to spawn one add-in. Let's make sure that they're invincible. Those just attach to him. That part doesn't really matter. But as you can see, now that we have a target, we can place them down and they will be able to keep stacking. And so one of the super core things is that we're going to place 4 down once a boss. That's just kind of their timer going off. Let me do my ultimate so that we can get some cooldown. We stacked up to 7, 8, 9, 10. There's 10 of the 3s. So that is just already 10,000 multiplier. And then we get a 350% increase on that. And we can spam our one ability, which will just stack up the number and stack up the number. And that's kind of the strategy that we're using for bossing, is we're going to be trying to place as many bombs as we possibly can on a boss and then detonate them all at once to get a air quotes, like one shot. So now that we have the general idea of what we want to do for bossing, which is stack up as many bombs as we possibly can, we get to look at our Transcendent modules. Now we've got Explosive Evade, which allows us to proc 1,000 damage explosives and add to that. That's fantastic. We've got cluster bombs, which allow us to get even more explosives happening on our ones, which is awesome. But the mod that we're actually going to be using for our bossing is Creative Explosion. Now, this modifies the fourth ability to do a few things. One, with Creative Explosion, our fourth ability will deal significantly less damage. As you can see, it's a like 4.9k multiplier. We take off Creative Explosion, it goes to 7.4. We don't really care about the damage loss. And also, without Creative Explosion, this gives us a 25% skill power increase. When we put Creative Explosion on, we actually lose that skill power and we get cooldown. Now, you may be like, that's pretty weird. You're losing damage and skill power. However, the cooldown here is going to allow us to place all of those bombs in that short duration. We really want as many bombs as possible going off. And so we are going to be just using his fourth ability to proc Narcissism, which is the buff that's going to give us 40% cooldown. Cooldown cap is 90%. So this allows us to hit cooldown cap very, very easily and spam as many bombs as possible so that we can just nuke bosses. So that is our Transcendent mod. To pair with that, we're going to be using MP Conversion and Nimble Fingers. Both of these are going to get us together to 62% cooldown. So we are slightly overcapped on cooldown. That brings us to about 100% cooldown with our buff up. You could possibly get away without using Nimble if you got a gold roll cooldown on your reactor, but not something we're too worried about. For our next mod, we're going to use Skill Expansion. This gives us increased range, which is not something that is like super important, but it is really nice quality of life. You kind of have two options here. You could go Skill Expansion, which allows our range to be a lot wider. When boss fights start, a lot of the times when we place our bombs, the boss will immediately start walking away from us, and then the range really helps for us to like apply our bombs because we have to place them at our feet instead of the boss walking out of our range and none of our bombs sticking. So Skill Expansion is what I would recommend. If you're very confident in your bomb sticking abilities, though, you can go for Duration, which allows the Narcissism buff to last to almost 20 seconds, which is also really nice. But we're going to be going range there. Next up, because the fight is like going on, we want some HP. Always want HP to allow us to not get one shot. And now that we've kind of got our cooldown, we've got our range, and we've got our healing, we're going to go for a lot of damage. So to start, we're going to be using Power Increase. Power Increase gives us more damage than like a Focus mod by about 17%, and it's worth sacrificing the cooldown to compensate. We are going to be using Focus on Tech. Focus on Tech is nice for the damage. It's not overly important because we already have over 1,000 modifier, but does help with the damage from the one ability. Then we're going to be using Fire Amplification and Tech Amplification. We are going a non-crit route. Non-crit is still very, very good for bossing because before you had to kind of rely on RNG that some of the bombs would crit because of Esimo's low crit chance. Now it's guaranteed every time to do an F ton of damage. And then we've got last two mods. These last two mods are kind of up to you. There's a lot of flexibility that you could go here. I personally went for Spear and Shield. We don't need a fully ranked one, honestly. It gives us 8.1% more skill power. And then our last mod depends on if you're playing solo or in co-op. If you are solo, I strongly recommend Fire Shishinctium. This gives us even more burst damage, and because we're usually killing the boss before they get to like do anything, Dangerous Ambush does not work. However, if you're playing in co-op, where you're going to be getting kind of the boss down and not instantly killing it in one burst, Dangerous Ambush is a awesome mod here for even more explosive damage. Now, getting your mods is half the battle. Because we are spamming our abilities before the boss spawns and as the boss is fighting us, max MP and MP components will make a massive difference to the amount of bombs that you can output before you run out of mana and have to explode them. So you're really looking for MP recovery out of combat. Placing the bombs will not put you in combat, so you can like preload and not lose any mana. Your sensor dropping with max MP and MP recovery in combat is also super helpful, and your like memory having MP recovery modifier all of these things will drastically help you with the amount of damage you're able to do, because the more mana, the more bombs, the more bombs, the more damage. So do not neglect your components. You will be really struggling if you do not have these. However, if you don't have any MP components and you still want to play the build, I would just throw, instead of those mods on, if you don't have good components, you can just throw in Maximize Conservation here. This will make a big difference in terms of just your ability to fire out a lot of bombs. If you got good components, you don't need it. You can go for more damage. If you don't have good components, throw on a conservation so you can use your skills more often. It'll feel a lot better. Real quick, for like a bossing damage rotation, when the boss spawns in, you're going to want to click your fourth ability. Just sprint to where the boss spawns. That's going to trigger your explosion. And then once your boss spawns, you're going to want to make sure that you place all of your explosives, get those ready. And then when the boss actually spawns in, that's when you're going to start spamming your abilities more. Start, shooting at it if you want to. Spamming your 1 and your 3, which you can do at the same time. Get as many explosives as you can on the boss. You're going to want to look for at least 16. You can see the number of explosives that you have down. It's okay if the fight takes a little bit longer. You want to explode all of them at the same time, because if you explode them at 10 or 11 or 12 and the boss doesn't die, it's going to go into an immune phase and the fight's going to be longer. So if you're trying to one-shot bosses, I strongly recommend 16 or higher explosives. 20 is awesome. And then obviously click the button and boss should go boom. Our next build is a very funny one, and it is the Bunesimo build, or Bunesimo. This build is hilarious to bring into group play. Obviously, as you can see, I haven't fully catalyzed it. If you wanted to fully catalyze it, you would just catalyze this X and make that an MP collector max rank. But because Esiemo is not an ultimate descendant, I did want to try to save y'all a catalyst. And so that is an option up to you. But the whole idea with the Bunesimo build is the fact that Creative Explosion not only gives us cooldown, but it also lowers the base cooldown of his fourth ability. We go, if without it, it's on a 80-second cooldown. With Creative Explosion, the fourth ability goes to a 40-second cooldown, and we get 40% more cooldown. And the whole thing with Creative Explosion, in the other build, we weren't using it for damage. Here, we can actually use it for damage. And this is kind of the whole build, is we're just going to be clicking the fourth ability. The fourth ability is going to give us a massive movement speed increase from running around, but we also get a movement speed increase once we're done with the ability. So it kind of looks like this, where we just sprint around. This lasts for a really long time. You can keep up with bunnies. You can jump. It does help if you have really high sensitivity or on mouse and keyboard, so that you can turn around. And then we are on a 40-second cooldown. We can use some abilities, do some damage. Or sorry, technically we're on a 12-second cooldown. But obviously, once we have actually Narcissism procced, as you can see after our first one, because we now have the 40%, 100% up of the time, we will just be able to chain sprints together. So we just run into a pack. There's our 40% cooldown. You can shoot your gun if you'd like, and then we're back into sprinting. This turns Esiemo into a running nuke, where he'll deal a ton of damage. You just run into a pack and hit them for multiple millions of damage, and then shoot your gun once, use an ability, whatever you want to do. You have to wait 2 seconds, and then you're back into full sprinting. This allows you to be one of the faster descendants. Unfortunately, you don't deal much damage while you're running. You only do really damage while you're exploding. But it is a very, very funny setup for running dungeons. For the mods on this build, they're pretty much the same. We opted for more cooldown rather than power increase here. Obviously, you could go power increase if you want some more damage. But we also opt in for Maximize Conservation because, this is a 80 MP cost. Maximize Conservation will allow us to, reduce the cost, use it more often. Still got our cooldown, still got our damage, still using Spear and Shield. We don't really need the tech stuff because we already have a massive multiplier. So the only reason I'm using focus on tech here is simply just for the cooldown. It's gonna be a 1% damage increase. Obviously, it'll help your 1 and 3, but you're not using those abilities all that much. In fact, you're intentionally not using them. Creative Explosion will use those for you. And then MP Collector as our last mod. You could technically use a level 1 focus on tech, just because MP is super important, because this costs a lot of mana, so we want to be making sure that we're getting mana back to deal as much damage as possible. For like general mobbing, we're going to be using Explosive Evade. I messed around with a bunch of his Transcendent modules. The Cluster Bomb setup is cool. You get a bunch of extra damage, but the Cluster Bombs only apply to his first ability, and the majority of our damage is coming from the third ability, so that didn't feel all that great. We tried Explosive Propaganda. This allows you to create clones that will draw all the aggro of the enemies in a dungeon, which did actually work pretty well. It was just a lot slower paced than I wanted to play on him, but there are a few other like Transcendent mods that you could basically just slap on this build. You wouldn't really change anything else, but for our like main mobbing mod, I opted for Explosive Evade. This allows us to get an evade. Whenever we evade, we put down a like 1,200 burst damage mine that just amplifies our damage even more. It adds to our explosive arsenal. We can have 3 of them up, and they allow us to chunk some bosses in addition to our third abilities. You kind of just roll, put down some 3s, and you'll one-shot most 400% dungeon bosses. It's pretty gross. But for the build, we're going to be using basically the same stuff. We are going to be opting for focus on tech, and fire amplification, tech amplification, and power increase as our damage modules. We've got MP conversion and nimble for our cooldown, maximize conservation so we can spam, skill expansion for our range. Once again, unfortunately, one thing I really think they should buff about Esiemo is his range. His max expandable range is 200% on basically everything, which, you know, our skill expansion gives us, what is it, like 92.3% expandable range, so we're only 8% off of max expandable range on him, so he only really needs 1 range mod, and then we're going to be using Spear and Shield for some extra damage and HP for some extra survivability. If you wanted to, you could slap in a like MP collector here if you felt like you needed mana, but this is what I was using for 400% dungeons, and 400% dungeons, you don't really need much mana. There's like already a ton of enemies dropping mana everywhere, so this is the setup that I would recommend. Now for his reactors, weapons, and components, his best in slot weapon by far is the Secret Garden. The Secret Garden has a buff that whenever you cast a tech skill, you can stack a pest control for 37% increased skill damage. That is disgusting, considering that he has an ability that you could spam 5 times on a like 0-second cooldown. Esiemo can very reliably get the like full damage effect of the Secret Garden. Unfortunately, I do not have a Secret Garden reactor, and swapping from the Secret Garden to something else breaks the buffs. So I was not using the Secret Garden in this video. I was missing out on a bunch of damage, which is a little scary considering the amount of damage that we were dealing. But just note, technically, Secret Garden's his best weapon. You want to be holding it pretty much all the time. You do have another 2 options for cool weapons with him, because you can shoot at the same time as you're planting your explosives. The Enduring Legacy was something that I was doing, where I could shoot an enemy, and as long as I was hitting them, if they were burning, I would be stripping their fire resistance. So that is also another buff for his burst damage. You can strip fire resistance with that, and also you could technically use a Nizastra's Devotion and shoot with the Nizastra's Devotion while you're doing all your explosives and lower defense. It's a little bit more like involved to use the Enduring Legacy and Nizastra's, and I don't think the payout is as good as the Secret Garden, but just giving you an FYI, that's kind of like the things that I would recommend with him. I had a reactor for the Perforator, which I was using with fire skill power and tech skill power. I think ideally your reactor, like god roll for me personally, would be tech and cooldown. Would be awesome for him. And then for bossing, I just had this like Enduring Legacy roll that had damage to Colossus. Funny enough, I was getting more damage from the damage to Colossus roll as a single gold than the double rolled values to his like boost ratios. But if your god roll for bossing would be damage to Colossus with tech boost ratio, would be ideal. For his components, I strongly recommend the Slayer set for bossing. Just makes your abilities do more damage. It's used on basically every ability Descendant. For mobbing, if you really wanted to squeak out some extra damage, you could rock 2-piece Volcanic set with 2-piece Annihilation. Would be really nice. Personally, I just rocked the things that made him the most comfy for me, which is my gold rolled max MP recovery, max MP, 2-piece annihilation set with defense and recovery modifier. And then I was just using the invader set because it gives a ton of HP, which feels really, really nice. But that's kind of what I was using for mobbing, was 2-piece invader, 2-piece annihilation. It's just a comfy set, but technically squeaking out the most damage, you'd want at least 2-piece volcanic on there for the like fire skill power. Not overly important if you don't have good rolls for it, though. Guys, that's going to do it for the Esiemo guide. I hope you enjoyed. Obviously, this is a character that has not gotten a lot of love or like screen time, especially on this channel. But with the new mons, he can do some pretty ridiculous things. I was definitely sleeping on him. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the guide. Let me know if you plan on building out Esiemo, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Take care. Peace.